Commonwealth would call Dr. Jonathan Brower as its next witness.
Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning.
All right. Ask you to keep your voice up so the jury can hear you. And with that, counsel.
Thank you. Good morning, sir. Can you please tell the jurors your first and last name?
It's Justin Brower, Brower.
And what do you do for work, sir?
I'm a forensic toxicologist for NMS Laboratories.
And where is that laboratory located?
The laboratory is located in Horsham, Pennsylvania, just north of Philadelphia.
And what does your laboratory do?
We are a reference laboratory. We do postmortem work, clinical work, and forensic drug work. So primarily my role is on the forensic side. I'm a forensic toxicologist.
Does your lab receive specimens from all across the country?
We do. We have clients in all 50 states. We do approximately half of the postmortem work in the United States, as well as a large number of clinical clients.
Is your lab accredited across several states and across the country?
We are, because we deal with, all the states in the United States, all the states in the country. We are accredited by just about every accrediting body that I'm aware of in the clinical and forensic aspects, as well as a lot of state certifications. So a lot of states have their own requirements. The most notable one is like New York State. So we're accredited by, again, every accrediting body that I'm aware of.
Okay. And how long have you worked for NMS Laboratory?
4 years as of August 1st.
And what's your educational background as a forensic toxicologist?
I have a Ph.D. in organic chemistry.
Where did you get that from?
The University of Nevada.
And do you have any other professional experience in this field prior to working for NMS?
I do. Before joining NMS Laboratories, I was a laboratory supervisor and then forensic toxicologist for the North Carolina Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, which is a statewide system. So we did the postmortem toxicology work for all 100 counties of the state of North Carolina.
And when it comes to your role in the forensic area of doing the toxicology testing, what is your role in the NMS lab when it comes to cases that come to the laboratory for forensic analysis?
So when a case comes into NMS and is logged in and the assigned or the requested test assigned and then run and reviewed multiple times in the laboratory, when all that testing is completed, it comes to the toxicology department, and my role is to review every aspect of that case. So I'm making sure that everything on the toxicology report is complete and accurate, such as all the demographic information that we have available to us, the name of the decedent or the patient, the date of birth, where it's from, the specimens that we received, and then also that all of everything that is reported is complete and accurate. Making sure that all the drugs that were tested for are reported, and that the reported concentrations are correct and accurate, and looking at every piece of raw data accumulated from the laboratory with that case, associated with that case.
Fair to say the NMS laboratory uses a batch review workflow.
That is correct. So we not only run the cases in batches, so we don't run one case at a time. That's not very efficient. I don't really know of any laboratory that does that anymore. So we will run cases, 10, 15, 30 or 40 at a time.
So as far as running a particular test and getting the raw data, that's usually done by other people in the laboratory, correct?
That is correct.
And then you come in at the end and review everything and have the ability to interpret the data.
That is correct.
Your training and experience as a forensic toxicologist, does that allow you to interpret concentration levels of particular types of drugs?
It does.
Okay. Now, as far as the testing done at NMS Laboratories, the traditional testing is kind of the drug testing, the panels for different common drugs, correct?
And typically we have clients request panels to be run where we're looking for, multiple drugs and classes of drugs at a time.
But are there circumstances when outside laboratories or outside individuals retain your lab in order to run specific tests?
Oh, absolutely.
I'm going to draw your attention to this particular case. Was your laboratory provided a blood sample from the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab in April of 2023?
I believe so. I'd really like to see the toxicology report so I can just confirm all of that, please.
Sure.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Hang on to that.
That's fine.
Okay. Correct. We received the specimens on April 7th, 2023.
And it came from the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab?
No, I don't know where they were initially sent from, but the client or the submitting agency is the District Attorney's Office of Plymouth.
Okay. As it pertains to the requested testing that was done, was it that panel that you described, or was it more specific testing?
This is what we call direct testing, where they requested just 4 specific drugs to be tested for.
And what were the 4 specific tests requested?
Lamotrigine, mirtazapine, quetiapine, and trazodone.
Are you familiar with those substances or those drugs?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you reviewed all of the data and information done at your lab in regards to these tests, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Were they able to identify concentration levels in the sample that was submitted for each one of those 4 substances?
Yes, ma'am.
And for the first, can you tell us what the result was?
Would you like me just to run down the list?
Sure.
We detected lamotrigine in a concentration of 6.1 micrograms per milliliter, mirtazapine at a concentration of 200 nanograms per milliliter, quetiapine at a concentration of 1,800 nanograms per milliliter, and trazodone at a concentration of 0.44 micrograms per milliliter. And these were all in blood.
In blood. With each drug that you just listed, are you familiar with the common name is for the drugs?
I'm not always that great with common names, but I can wing it.
Okay. Well, the lamotrigine, and forgive me if I botch
That's okay.
the pronunciation, that's also referred to commonly as Lamictal.
It is correct, Lamictal.
What kind of drug is that?
It's typically used as an anti-seizure medication. So if somebody has a seizure disorder, it can be prescribed to alleviate seizures, but it is also used for bipolar disorder as well.
And mirtazapine, fair to say that's commonly referred to as Remeron.
Correct.
And what kind of drug is that?
That isn't typically an antidepressant.
And quetiapine, what's that common drug?
Quetiapine is known as Seroquel.
And fair to say that's an antipsychotic as well for
Yes.
bipolar?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you familiar with whether that often can be prescribed in low doses for sleep?
It is. It can be for insomnia.
And trazodone, what's the common name for trazodone, if you know?
I am drawing a blank on the trazodone.
If I suggest trazamine, is that familiar?
Not the one I'm most familiar with, and I apologize.
That's okay, but you're familiar with trazodone.
Correct, yeah.
And what class of drug is that?
That's an antidepressant.
Now, in your review of the levels that were detected in these 4 tests for each of these substances, do any of these levels appear to be outside therapeutic concentration levels?
The only one that's a little elevated would be the quetiapine.
Okay. Mentioned the term therapeutic concentration. You familiar with that term?
Correct.
What does that mean?
It's the typical concentration that one would achieve when they're taking the medication or drug as indicated by their prescriber.
And are you familiar with toxic concentrations or suicidal concentrations?
I am.
And what does that mean?
Those are concentrations that could lead to adverse events and potentially death.
Now, in relation to the 4 substances that were tested at the NMS laboratory, you identified the levels for each of the 4 substances. Were any of those levels, concentration levels, considered within therapeutic concentration?
They would all be in what I would say a therapeutic concentration, except maybe the quetiapine, which is slightly elevated.
Okay. And in your experience as a forensic toxicologist, have you had the occasion to review cases, postmortem cases in which suicide was a mechanism of death where the person consumed medication?
Absolutely, yes.
And so that level of the quetiapine at the 800 nanograms per milliliter, would that have been in that toxic or suicidal level?
No, ma'am.
Would you generally expect to see that significantly greater in a suicide case?
Typically, quetiapines in suicide cases might be in the, close to 10,000 nanograms per milliliter. Usually people take handfuls of pills when they're trying to harm themselves and take their own life. And this is not consistent with that.
Now, are you also familiar in your training and experience with the class of drugs called benzodiazepines?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you have the occasion to interpret data as it pertains to concentration levels for those?
Every single day.
And as far as the substances diazepam, noradiazepam, oxazepam, temazepam, lorazepam, you're familiar with those?
I am.
And it's fair to say noradiazepam, oxazepam, temazepam, those are all metabolites of diazepam?
Typically, yes, ma'am.
And what's the common name for diazepam?
Valium.
If I show you what's been marked as Exhibit 183 already.
My eyesight's not great, too, so.
Anything about the levels that you observed here regarding those substances, those benzodiazepines, that tell you that they're outside therapeutic concentration levels?
The diazepam and the nordiazepam, oxazepam, and temazepam metabolites, the diazepam looks to be sub-therapeutic, meaning lower than what is typically expected from a therapeutic dose. Most therapeutic doses of diazepam, which is an anxiolytic drug or an anti-anxiety drug, are typically 200, 250 thereabouts nanogram per milliliter. The lorazepam, depending upon the dose, could be a therapeutic concentration, if not maybe a little bit lower than expected.
Okay. When you're reviewing these cases as the reporting forensic toxicologist, are there limitations on what you can say about the effects of these types of medications?
We can speak as to the general effects that drugs can have on the general population, but we try to restrict ourselves from saying with absolute certainty that a drug will have this effect on this specific person, because we just aren't there to witness their behavior.
Okay, so that was kind of the follow-up. So
I'm sorry.
What are the things that are the unknowns for you when you're just looking at data?
When we say that we can't do toxicology in a vacuum, you can't know everything about the case just by looking at numbers on the toxicology report and drugs on a toxicology report. You need other information to have an informed opinion. In the postmortem world, that would be the investigation itself, the history of the case, the scene findings, interviews with, families and friends of the decedent, as well as autopsy findings as well. In a case like this, where it's not a decedent and the person is alive, you still need to know some facts of the case, some sort of history of the case, like what happened. So just numbers on a page, you can just make very generalized types of opinions, such as that looks to be therapeutic, it looks to be high, it looks to be low, and then again, just the general effects on the drugs on people.
And in this particular instance, you were not provided any further information about the case or the investigation in order to make any more opinions about effects.
I knew nothing about this case until we spoke, I think it was probably a few weeks ago.
And as far as the information available to you, you only had the data from the specimen that was tested, correct?
That is correct. Just these 4 drugs that were requested to be tested for.
And as far as the 4 drugs that were tested by your lab, what are the general characteristics of some of those drugs?
So these are generally antidepressants and antipsychotic medications. So if somebody had, the lamotrigine, if somebody has, say, bipolar disorder, like wild mood swings, depressive episodes, or psychotic episodes, these drugs could be prescribed. They also have depressant effects, so they could make people become, lethargic or sleepy.
Would any of the combination of these drugs cause a person to stop breathing?
It's possible. Especially the mirtazapine, quetiapine, the trazodone, and then the 2 other benzodiazepines. Those are all central nervous system depressants, so they could, in large combinations or large concentrations and in combination with each other, cause central nervous system depression, which could reduce people's respiration rates.
But in the levels that you observed in the testing, that your lab did, as well as what I just showed you from Exhibit 183, is there anything about those concentration levels that would give you a sense that the person could have stopped breathing as a result of these?
Not necessarily, but if I had the information that, a patient presented to an emergency department and they had labored breathing and weren't breathing adequately, and I had this information, then you could probably tie all that together. But without that extra information, then generally no.
Based on the levels alone, you can't give any sort of opinion.
I would like to not.
Okay. Are you familiar with the drug Narcan?
I am.
And what kind of effect does the drug Narcan have on a person who has consumed these drugs, if any?
Just these drugs that we've talked about here today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely nothing.
Can you explain to us why it is that Narcan wouldn't have an effect?
Narcan is an opioid overdose reversal agent. It is an opioid antagonist. So it binds to the opioid receptors. So it doesn't allow other opioids like, say, fentanyl or oxycodone to bind to those receptors to have effects. So it only works on opioids. None of these drugs work on the opioid receptors, so Narcan would have no effect whatsoever on these drugs.
Okay, thank you.
Attorney Reddington.
Good morning.
Dr. Brower, so one of the things that you had mentioned is that you, and I think I would quote you, I would like not to give an opinion without basically the underlying facts. In other words, what you're saying is that the numbers alone do not tell the tale of what happened to a particular individual, right?
Correct. They don't tell the entire story.
Right. And for NMS Laboratory, you were retained or working for the DA's office, these people here, right?
That was the submitting agency, correct.
And they certainly were not constrained from picking up the phone and calling you and telling you that this is blood from a woman that threw herself out a window and tried to kill herself after cutting her wrists and her neck. They could have told you that, right?
Well, overruled.
It's possible that does happen in rare occasions in high-profile cases.
Right. And so that would have been something, for example, the facts that you wanted to know, that you would have liked to have known to kind of round out your opinion about the actual level of the drugs in the blood that you examined, right?
It's not necessary.
Well, it's not necessary, but you did indicate that you would like to not give an opinion without the facts.
Correct.
Okay.
Today.
From the witness stand.
Correct. I don't have all the information.
Of course. And the word therapeutic, is that consistent with, in other words, the treatment level of a particular narcotic or drug in the blood?
Correct. It's the concentration of the drug in the body to elicit an effect or the desired effect.
Find the record. As it relates to the therapeutic level, sir, is it your understanding that the lorazepam, lorazepam, clonazepam, the counsel had asked you about the benzodiazepines were within therapeutic, thank you, within therapeutic level?
I'm sorry, I had trouble hearing you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. They were within therapeutic level?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the entire question?
Sure. What is lamotrigine?
Lamotrigine is typically used as an anti-seizure medication and could also be used for bipolar disorder.
Okay. Do you have the results for your lab in front of you?
Yes, sir.
Toxicology? Yeah, you can read along just so you can refresh your memory if it helps. The lamotrigine, it says 6.1. What does that mean?
6.1 micrograms per milliliter. So there were 6.1 micrograms of lamotrigine per milliliter of blood.
All right. Is that above therapeutic, below therapeutic, or therapeutic?
It's right in the middle of the therapeutic range.
So if somebody had a prescription, for example, for that narcotic or that drug, then they were taking the drug according to the recommended dose, right?
And that's what it would appear to me if they were prescribed it, correct?
How about the mirtazapine?
The mirtazapine also looks to be probably used appropriately as prescribed.
And you need a prescription for that, don't you?
Yes, you need a prescription for all four of these drugs.
Okay. And is there another name for mirtazapine?
Remeron.
Remeron. All right. And what is the purpose, or what do you use Remeron for?
It's an antidepressant.
How about the courtCHOPT is the number 3?
The quetiapine is also known as Seroquel, and that is generally used as an antipsychotic.
And what does that mean when you say an antipsychotic? What does that mean?
To somebody who has psychotic episodes, say like hallucinations or just not seeing reality like a quote, normal person would,
Okay.
they could be prescribed quetiapine as an antipsychotic to try to kind of level out their brain chemistry.
And what was the result on the courtCHOPT?
1,800 nanograms per milliliter.
Now, is that within therapeutic? Is that below or high?
It looks high to me, depending upon the dosage.
Okay. And trazodone is the next one. What is that?
Trazodone is also an antidepressant.
And what's the result on that?
Oh, I'm sorry, 0.44 micrograms per milliliter.
Okay. And is that therapeutic, below therapeutic, or above therapeutic?
I would say that's a therapeutic concentration.
Okay. So basically, with the exception of the quetiapine that was 1,800 nanograms per. What is a nanogram? What does that mean? Nanograms per milliliter. What does that mean?
It's a very, very small amount. It's 1/1,000,000th of a milligram.
Okay. And that's how you measure the quantity of a particular substance that would be in a person's blood, correct?
In the blood, correct.
So on the quetiapine at 1,800 nanograms per milliliter, that's the only one that was not therapeutic. That was a little higher than therapeutic. Is that correct?
Correct. It's approximately maybe double what you might expect. So when I say it's a little elevated, it's not in a concentration that I would consider to be necessarily toxic or lethal.
Okay. And you don't know, working for NMS Labs, sir, whether or not a person had a prescription for these drugs, or when they got the prescription, or who gave them the prescription. You don't know that, right?
I have none of that information, no.
You could have known that if somebody had told you that, but you don't know it from looking at the numbers that we have here, right?
Correct. It's possible if they would have given us that information. We don't always need to have it, though.
Can I just see it again first?
Oh, sure.
If we can just approach briefly on the issue.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to introduce that exhibit at this time.
Same as this one.
Same numbers on the top, right? Where the square is.
Correct.
Same numbers.
Correct.
Thank you, sir. That's all.
All right. Yeah, Commonwealth?
Dr. Brower, you, in fact, once got this case for review, you authored a corrected report in regards to this case, correct?
Correct.
At this point, I would move to admit the report as submitted.
All right, that may be admitted as well.
Yeah.
All right. All right, thank you, Doctor.
Am I released?
Mr. Ross, thank you.
Thank you.
Your Honor, prior to the next witness, the Commonwealth would move to submit 4 stipulations the parties have entered into. First being a stipulation regarding DNA known standard samples. The second being a stipulation regarding DNA evidence for the blue exercise band and the red-brown stain on the basement floor. The third being the stipulation regarding DNA evidence for the yellow exercise band and the black exercise band. And the fourth being a stipulation regarding DNA comparisons for the blue exercise band and the red-brown stain in the basement.
That's right. We don't need to have all those witnesses.
All right, so those stipulations may be entered as exhibits. Counsel, do you want those published or read to the jury, or satisfied that they'll have those? And the parties can refer to the contents of the stipulations.
The only one.
That's on me. I kind of jumped in there. I'm sorry. Well, you know what? I want to read it. All right. So that's what we'll do. All right. So members of the jury, remember, I think it was yesterday or the day before, I talked a little bit about those stipulations. So the same instructions. These are facts that I'm going to read that the parties have agreed to, that you can rely on in arriving at your verdict at the end of this case. This is one of 4 that was just introduced. You'll have all 4 of them with you back in the jury room when you deliberate. But so let me just read this one stipulation. This doesn't mean this stipulation is any more important than any of the other ones, but the parties would like me to just read this one here. All right, so this is a stipulation regarding the DNA comparisons for the blue exercise band and the red-brown stain. It was marked A. Now, in the above captioned matter, the parties agree to the following facts as it pertains to the DNA comparisons for the blue exercise band and the red-brown stain A in the basement. Number 1, forensic scientist Emily Oliver reviewed and interpreted the data relating to the question items, paragraph, parentheses, item 2-4, blue exercise band, and item 3-3, the red-brown stain A from the basement floor, close parentheses, and conducted comparison analysis to the known standards in this case. Number 2, the parties agreed to the following conclusions regarding comparison analysis of these items. A, item 2-4.1.1, sample from the ends of the blue exercise band. The DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors. There are 5 individuals who have a likelihood ratio that indicates an inclusion in the profile. They are Dawson Clancy, Callan Clancy, Cora Clancy, Lindsay Clancy, and Patrick Clancy. B, item 2-4.2.1, sample from the middle of the blue exercise band. The DNA profile was interpreted as a mixture of 3 contributors. Callan Clancy is included as a major contributor. And C, item 3-3.1, sample of swabs from the red-brown stain A on the basement floor. The DNA profile was interpreted as originating from a single contributor. Cora Clancy is included as a contributor to this DNA profile. So that's the stipulation that the parties have agreed to. All right.
And one last stipulation to be marked as the next exhibit, the stipulation regarding batch work done at NMS Labs. We're not asking that this be read at this
Okay.
time.